Future Warrior, Earth's Children. Chapter 13. Standing on the spacious bridge of the USS Aquarius, Vice Admiral Yoshiro Matsuda watched the tactical display with anticipation, the time to target counting down. The massive bulk of the Aquarius vibrated slightly under his feet as she slid through space propelled by her faster-than-light engines. The mission briefing from High Admiral Tourville had been short and to the point. The Army may be mired clearing these systems, but the Navy is not. You are to lead a deep penetration patrol, a raid, if you will, into enemy space. Your job is to operate behind the lines as long as possible, inflict maximum chaos and maximum damage. Find them, engage them, give them no rest, no time, no quarter. You are my hound, slip from the leash, Yoshiro. Let the galaxy burn. To complete this mission, he had been given command of the newly created Task Force 33, comprising 5 astrology-class battlecruisers, the UES Taurus, Libra, Aries, Gemini, and Aquarius. The battlecruisers were supported by 5 cruisers, the Ocean-class UES Arctic, the City-class UES Moscow and Yokosuka, and the Pantheon-class UES Hestia and Zeus. Also attached were 6 destroyers, 3 tribal-class, the UES Gotland, Leyte, and Sardinia, and 3 tribal-class, UES Matabele, Tamil, and Zulu. 16 strong, the ships of the task force had been crammed with as much fuel, ordnance, and supplies as they could carry. Their mission was to fight, and they intended to fulfill that task. Matsuda turned to his navigational staff officer, NSO, Janet Combs. "So, once more onto the breach, Janet?" Janet chuckled lightly. "Onto the breach is my specialty, sir." Matsuda grinned. He knew the whole bridge crew were listening, and he could feel some of the stress in the room begin to dissipate. Indeed, what does the plot look? He knew the question was unnecessary, but it felt good to talk, to do something other than wait in silence. "The plot is perfect, sir, just as it was when I first entered it. Nice to hear you are not slipping in, SO. Time of target? 16 minutes, sir." Matsuda turned. "TSO, anything new from the reconnaissance probes?" The tactical staff officer, TSO, didn't look up as he scanned his console. "Negative, sir. All 4 recon birds are squawking. Enemy communications remain constant. Scans do not show any major fleet movements or indication that they have detected us." "Excellent," said Matsuda. "Notify me of any change." 14 minutes later, the TSO suddenly broke the silence. "Sir, aspect change on multiple targets. It's a good bet they know we're here." Matsuda nodded and turned and slipped on his 3DSI helmet. It mattered little. It was already too late. With a rippling series of flashes, Task Force 33 dropped out of faster-than-light speed. Janet was the first to speak. "Sir, we are confirmed in our lane. Right where we should be." Matsuda acknowledged. "Excellent. All ahead flank. Take us in. I want all ships to maintain as much velocity as possible." "TSO, what's the status of the destroyer wings?" "Both wings report ready, sir." Matsuda checked the system plot through his 3DSI helmet display. The Lalande 21185 system was laid out before him. Lalande had 3 planets. Of them, 1 was close to the star and uninhabitable due to the extreme hot temperatures, while the 2 others were further out, but as yet unterraformed. 1 was rocky, but dry and lacked a viable atmosphere, while the other outermost planet was almost 14 times the size of Earth and was a frozen world. This gave it potential, but the sheer scale, cost, and the presence of better candidates in other nearby systems meant it remained empty and untouched. In many ways, Lalande was a backwater system of little value, and this was perhaps what had drawn the Deimos to the area in the first place. In the time since their withdrawal from Earth, the Deimos had established a ship repair and maintenance facility in the system, and a threat plot showed numerous Deimos warships and large facilities in orbit around the outermost planet, identified on the tactical plot as Lalande Externus. The system was heavily defended, but taking the system was not Matsuda's plan. As the battlecruiser and destroyers of Task Force 33 speared into the system at high velocity, the Deimos vessels reacted, several battleship-class, and more than a dozen smaller cruiser and destroyer-class ships moving to intercept. Deeper into the system, a host of other Deimos repair, supply, and logistics ships began to power up and move slowly away from the threat. As the forces closed, Matsuda watched the fleet's data and trajectory. The timing had to be perfect. With a distant series of flashes, the 5 cruisers attached to Task Force 33 entered the opposite side of the system, their engines immediately flaring to life as they plunged inwards toward the poorly protected onrushing Deimos repair, supply, and logistics ships. Sir, aspect change on targets. Some of the enemy capital ships and destroyers are reversing course. Their formation is in disarray. Matsuda took a moment to review the tactical display himself, more from habit than from any lack of trust in his tactical staff officer's ability. He had wrong-footed the Deimos and presented them with a dilemma. The Deimos could either continue to block the advance of his main force and risk losing their support ships, or divide their forces to attempt to counter both threats. It seems that discipline had broken amongst the Deimos captains, and there was no cohesion as the previously tight Deimos formation fractured. On cue, Matsuda saw his destroyer wings increase their speed and surge ahead, seeking firing range. As the distance closed, the destroyers released their payload of heavyweight orbital torpedoes or hot rounds. The massive anti-ship missiles flared brightly as they burned towards the distant Deimos ships, each weapon activating its active and passive defensive suite. HOTS had formidable destructive power and were a threat that could not be ignored. As soon as the hot rounds began their one-way trip towards the Deimos capital ships, Matsuda turned to his bridge officers. "All right, let's show them what we can do. Full ahead. Angle us in on that repair facility. I want a firing solution." With a sudden surge of speed, the 5 massive astrology-class battlecruisers leapt ahead and angled obliquely away from the Deimos ships, towards the inner system. "Sir, destroyer wings report all weapons away, and that they are withdrawing." Matsuda nodded in acknowledgement, his attention intently on the enemy ships. Some were maneuvering to intercept, but it was obvious that they would be too slow, the speed of the battlecruisers far higher than the Deimos ships could manage. Tactical: signal the task force, engage targets of opportunity, but maintain focus on priority objectives. Almost immediately, the battlecruisers opened up with their long-ranged pulse and rail cannons, sending flashes of fire arcing toward the distant enemy ships. The chance of a hit at the extreme range was low, but it would create one more factor for the Deimos to have to respond to. The Deimos ships had also launched volleys of missiles, but it was clear from the threat plot that they would not catch the battlecruisers. The distance and angles meaning they would likely expend their fuel before coming close enough to worry the defensive aid suite. On the far side of the system, the cruisers had also opened fire, raking the fleeing support ships, the killing beginning in earnest. "Sir, we are approaching maximum firing range on primary target." "Very well. All ships engage as they bear." As Matsuda watched, a blazing bolt of energy fire flashed across the front of the Aquarius. Apparently, the Deimos battleships had also found the range. Then in unison, the 5 battlecruisers of Task Force 33 switched their fire, the coordinated salvos of railgun fire angling away towards the distant icy orb of Lalande Externus. "All right, navigation, get us out of here, vector us to the nearest safe jump point." Communications: signal the cruiser division, withdraw now. Tactical: status. The TSO took a moment before responding. "Sir, the destroyers are clear and approaching jump point." The Lady took a glancing hit from a capital ship-grade weapon and is venting, but she will make it. The cruiser division is withdrawing on good order, no losses. The Gemini was bracketed by a salvo and took some hits on her larboard. Casualties reported, but it looks like her armor absorbed the worst of it. Matsuda turned and looked behind, using the 3DSI system to see through the bulk of the Aquarius. The Gemini remained in formation, but debris and venting gas was visible along the port side of her superstructure. Despite the damage, she was continuing to return fire at the enemy with gusto. What are the enemy? Hard to tell, sir. As soon as the engagement started, the Deimos began using layer jamming, probably to minimize our accuracy. It is making it hard to get a clear battle damage assessment picture. We definitely landed some hits, but I'll need to wait for clear data from the reconnaissance birds once we are clear to give you a definite assessment. Matsuda frowned inwardly and nodded. As he did, he felt a tremor pass through the Aquarius as an enemy round found its mark. He glanced at the damage control coordination station, the operator answering him without needing to be asked. Minimal damage, sir, was an energy round. The shields absorbed most of it. No reports of casualties. Matsuda glanced around before being interrupted by Janet. Sir, we have reached escape vector. Can jump on your command. Thank you, Janet. Tactical, confirm the destroyer wings and cruiser division are clear. Yes, sir, all have jumped. Very well, jump us away. With his order, the first in a series of rapid jumps began to get them clear of the system and eliminate any risk of pursuit before taking them to the prearranged assembly point, a nondescript point in empty space between systems. By the time they had reached the rendezvous point, the tactical staff officer and his team of analysts had compiled a battle damage report from the action. The salvo of HOTS had only scored a single hit, one cutting a Deimos destroyer-class vessel in two, but that was expected. The salvo had been designed primarily to distract the Deimos capital ships, and in that it had been a success. The Deimos battleships had taken a few hits from the battlecruisers, but nothing critical. The Deimos repair facility was a different story, however. Compared to the Deimos warships, the facility was virtually stationary and had few defenses, relying instead on the Deimos ships and secrecy for protection. The facility had taken numerous capital ship-grade weapon hits, which had caused massive damage, and the wrecked facility had been sent spiraling towards the cold embrace of Lalande Externus. The gravity from the massive planet dragging the disabled and powerless repair facility to the surface in a flaming wreck. The loss of the facility would eliminate a ship repair capability for the remaining Deimos ships in this region. However, an even more grave loss had been suffered. On the far side of the system, the cruiser division had wreaked havoc on the lightly protected Deimos support ships, destroying 7 utterly, and disabling and damaging a dozen more before being forced to withdraw. That would be a loss the Deimos would be unable to replace. Their mobility, ability to move troops, supplies, and equipment would be reduced. Their fleet of support ships was a finite resource, and that resource was now considerably less than before the actions of Task Force 33. Matsuda noted the loss of 76 UEF and UEMC personnel in the action, but all ships, with the exception of the destroyer Leyte, which had been sent back to friendly space for repairs, remained operational. Matsuda knew the losses were acceptable. There would be more before the mission of the task force was complete. Matsuda took a deep breath. Janet, plot a course to the next target system. Communications, signal the task force. We're going back in. The drone was small, barely larger than a bee, but it maneuvered unerringly towards its target on fine microfilament wings. Its logic processor had been uploaded with a 3D model of the designated building and the coordinates for its programmed access point. As it approached, it circled around the building, following the contours of the structure, before it smoothly pivoted and landed soundlessly on the window. In the still night air, nothing stirred. The approach route through the gated compound of houses had been carefully selected to avoid the multiple surveillance and defensive systems that protected the compound while being achievable on the drone's limited power supply. Carefully, the drone walked awkwardly along the window frame on spindly metallic legs before pausing. As it sat frozen in place, it used its thermal sensor to peer into the darkened room beyond. Seeing a single heat signature on the bed, the drone's secondary protocol activated, and it raised a small needle-like probe. Using tiny actuators, the drone extended its stinger-like probe into the fine mesh that covered the window. The probe was pushed through one of the tiny holes before being angled towards the bed across the silent room. With a barely audible hiss of compressed air, a small jet of liquid was fired into the room. the liquid almost instantly transitioning to a gas as it made contact with the air. Its mission completed, and with only 15% of its energy remaining, the drone fired off a burst transmission containing mission data and telemetry before shutting down. Stalker stepped off the transport, taking in the still, quiet streets of the city of La Paz. The air smelt cool, clean, and dry, with a hint of dust from the surrounding desert and mountains. It was still early, but after his routine daybreak jog, he had caught the first of the day's regular shuttle runs into La Paz from the base. It was Sunday morning, and during the past 12 weeks of training, he had fallen into a routine of traveling on Sundays into La Paz to go to a proper cafe for breakfast. It was his enforced mental break from the otherwise all-consuming training continuum. The course was nearly over. In only 2 days, he was scheduled to finally travel to Germany to see Zoe for some post-training leave, and his steps felt lighter as he thought about seeing her. After the first few weeks, he had settled on a small corner cafe called Café Pampas, named after the unique pampas grass that was endemic to much of lowland South America. The cafe had whitewashed stone walls and consisted of barely a dozen small tables. This early it was quiet, and as he moved to sit at his normal table, he only noticed one other person sitting at a nearby table. Stalker had just taken his first sip of the coffee, a strong local blend with earthy overtones that he had come to like, when abruptly the other customer in the cafe was standing opposite. "Mind if I join you?" Before Stalker could answer, the man pulled out a chair and sat down opposite him. The man was young. Stalker guessed in his mid to late 20s, was dressed in smart casual attire, clean-shaven with dark, slightly wavy hair cut short. The man had a warm smile, but Stalker looked into his eyes and saw only stony coldness. He had the eyes of a killer. Instinctually, Stalker began to slowly lower one hand off the table to reach for the concealed pistol he carried, but the man spoke first. "Please don't do that. All it will do is cut our conversation short, and we have a lot to discuss, you and I." Stalker gently put his hand back on the table. He could not see any weapon or obvious sign of threat from the man, but something in his tone made Stalker absolutely sure that to go for his pistol would be a mistake. Stalker leant back, trying to radiate calm. "Do I know you?" The man's smile broadened. "No, but I think I may know you. I have seen your picture somewhere. Are you famous?" Stalker forced a thin smile. "No." The man made a show of appearing to ponder deeply. I'm sure I've seen you somewhere. You're not one of those assault troopers, are you? The ones dressed all in black." Stalker replied evenly. I am. Is there something I can do for you, citizen?" The younger man frowned. "Citizen, might have been true once, not anymore now. Things are just a bit more complicated." As the man talked, Stalker was looking around carefully at the surrounding street, the occasional person passing by. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but his internal sense of danger was screaming at him. Stalker was about to speak when the stranger abruptly asked, "Are you married?" Stalker felt his jaw tighten and replied through clenched teeth, "No." The man's smile thinned. "Really interesting," and he took a printed physical photographic image out of his pocket and carefully placed it on the table. "Does this look familiar?" Barely tilting his head, Stalker glanced down at the image. It was a photo he had seen many times. It was him and Zoe embracing in the burning ruins of UEF Ramstein just before the Dimos invasion. It was an image the world had seen. "Looks like you're pretty close. She's a beautiful woman. You are a lucky man." Stalker did not respond, but his hand began to once again creep towards his sidearm. The man cocked his head to the side. "Not sure you want to do that." Stalker grinned wolfishly. "Pretty sure I do." "Fair," the man said. "Points for honesty." Stalker nodded slowly. "So we have had our little chit-chat. You're going to tell me why you are here and what you want." "It can't be to kill me. There are faster and easier ways to kill someone. You have a point to make, so make it." The stranger's expression shifted, some of the false humanity slipping, the voice suddenly shifting to be flat and emotionless. "You have cost me a lot of time, money, and assets. Normally, that's just the cost of doing business, and I would just kill you and be done with it. But you have also helped create something far more insidious, hope, and that requires a different remedy. This is a warning, no one, and nowhere is beyond my reach. And hope is an illusion. Remember that. Despite the death in the man's eyes, Stalker almost chuckled. A bit melodramatic, especially since I have no idea who the fuck you are, but I hear you. The man sat for another few seconds before standing. One last piece of advice. You're not going to want to leave your seat or reach for that weapon until I am good and gone. Stalker just nodded, trying to take in and memorize as many details of the man as possible. The man had turned and began walking across the street when Stalker's personal comms device began to chime. Without looking back, the man called out, "You're going to want to take that." Stalker slowly reached into his jacket pocket, being careful to keep his hand away from his pistol, and activated the device. 30 seconds later, Stalker was running. Janet Combs looked over at Vice Admiral Yoshiro Matsuda, who unusually for him was seated in his command chair, his posture outwardly relaxed, but she knew her commander and could see the concealed tension. Task Force 33 had just hit their latest target, the GI-687 system. The raid, their fifth, had been a success, and the Deimos supply depot had been destroyed. Resistance had been light, too light, something fell off, and everyone on the bridge sensed it. The Deimos fleet was weak, but it was not defeated. By now, the battlecruiser raids should have prompted a more vigorous response, some attempt to either reinforce likely targets, to draw in and coalesce vulnerable scattered forces to fewer but more defensible locations, or to form counter-squadrons to hunt them down. The Deimos did not appear to have done anything in response. Janet looked at the navigational data in front of her. Each raid had seen them move deeper into Deimos-held space, but resistance remained light. They had dispatched stealthy reconnaissance drones to dozens of systems, and many had found Deimos forces, with ships regularly seen transiting in and out of the systems. But none had any large fleet concentrations, no obvious task forces or central operational zone, just a constantly moving dispersed posture. Using her display, Janet zoomed out and did a playback of the recon data, looking for patterns. At first, she saw nothing, no obvious patrol routines, just seemingly random ship movements, but something pulled at her awareness, something just outside of recognition. A pattern, or more accurately, the lack of one. She layered onto the display the locations of UEF fleet units, and then she saw it. The Deimos ship movements detected were not completely random. They were moving widely dispersed and in small numbers, but not without purpose. They were scattering outwards, each movement seemingly designed to avoid any corresponding UEF forces. The effect was like watching a vast clawed hand stretching out, slowly, carefully, reaching for the gaps in UEF presence across the galaxy. Janet did not truly know what she was looking at, but she knew she saw something. She turned to Matsuda. "Sir, do you have a moment? I think I have something." Stalker did not know how long he had sat in the hospital. Time seemed to flow like water. Awareness was not gone, just muted, like listening to muffled sound through a wall. It had taken him 12 hours to reach Germany, and when he had arrived, Zoe had been in intensive care, and there she remained. Medical staff had come to talk to him on 2 occasions. Both times they had shared only minimal details, just that she was alive and was still in surgery, and that they would update him as soon as they could. Stalker felt broken. His rational mind knew that he was not at fault, but somehow he felt he was. This was the 3rd time Zoe had been hurt, once when they had met on Mars, once after being shot down, and now. The first 2 times had been combat. It was war. Zoe was a warrior, as brave a person as he had known. Every time she was on operations, her life was at risk. It had been her duty. This was different. This was attempted murder, cold, clinical, targeted assassination, and it was designed to hurt him where he was most vulnerable. Under Stalker's fear and despair, cold fury, deep and volcanic burned, and when it erupted, it would be incandescent and uncontainable. Stalker was dimly aware of footsteps and looked up, and to his surprise, he saw both Link and his company intelligence officer, CIO, Lee Waters, walking towards him. Something on Link's face made Stalker stand. For a moment, Stalker struggled for words, his mind hazy and unfocused due to stress and having not slept for over 24 hours. "What are you doing here, Link?" Link's face remained ashen. "Orders, boss. Can you do me a favor and sit back down, please?" Without thinking, Stalker did, and Link sat next to him. "I have news, boss, about Zoe." Stalker tensed, but before he could speak, Link continued. "She's alive, boss." "Okay, she's alive. The doctors say she's going to make it, but she is in an induced coma." Stalker felt relief flow into him, and he began to rise, planning on seeing her that instant. But a hand on his shoulder from Lee gently pushed him back down. "There's more." Link paused, seeming to struggle to form words, his mouth moving but no sound came out. Then, clamping his jaw, he went on. "Boss, it's the baby's, boss. They cannot be saved. They're gone. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Stalker felt himself falling into a vortex. His mind was swirling, and he did not know if he was going to faint, vomit, or both. The shock was total. Stalker had been so focused on Zoe, he had almost forgotten that she was pregnant with twins, the concept still somehow alien to him. For the first time, Lee Waters spoke, his deep, gruff voice cutting through the fog. "We don't know what they used, but it was a hemorrhagic compound designed to cause massive bleeding." Link turned to speak, but Waters cut him off. "He deserves to know. He needs to know." Link just nodded, his expression grave. "As I was saying, this was a chemical agent, likely warfare adapted. Zoe is damn strong. She managed to reach and activate her communicator to call for help despite the pain and blood loss. The fast reaction time of the base medical response team, plus several massive transfusions of blood and plasma, saved her. She shouldn't have made it. The lead med tech said the fact that she is still breathing is a damn miracle." Waters leaned down and looked Stalker in the face. "They hit your wife, a UEDF member and wife to a Terra Nova battle commander, with a chemical weapon. Make no mistake, whoever did this is dead." Stalker could feel his mind grasping on to what Waters had said, rebelling against the news of a loss, and instead trying to focus on something else, something more digestible. He clasped his hands tightly together as they began to shake uncontrollably. He could feel grief and fury surging within, both trying to be the first to overwhelm his mental defenses. Stalker focused on a spot on the wall opposite and forced himself to breathe. Through an act of sheer willpower and through gritted teeth, Stalker turned to Waters. "When can I see her?" Waters looked at Stalker carefully and then nodded, seemingly satisfied. The quack said, "Not for a while. Even though she is still in a coma, she still needs to go through another round of decontamination, and she is still having periodic transfusions as they're trying to stabilize her endocrine system. Realistically, it will be a couple of days." Stalker stood, his voice cold. "Take me to her place. I want to see the scene and talk to the investigating team." Link stood as well. "You got it, boss." Stalker spent the next 24 hours speaking to the investigative team, being interviewed about his encounter at La Paz, and piecing together the sequence of events. He also managed to gain a few hours of fitful sleep. Stalker had to admit the investigative team were very good. Within hours of the attack, following a sweep by chemical decontamination specialists of the crime scene, they had already developed a number of firm leads. The delivery system, a micro-drone, had been located and analyzed. They had also analyzed the compound itself and were tracing its origin. Records of signals emissions from the drone also allowed the operator location to be triangulated, and a number of raids had already taken place. All the evidence pointed to a well-funded and well-trained, technically proficient operation. The evidence pointed to a Red Legion kill team. Stalker was almost dozing off when his personal comm chimed. Automatically, "Stalker, answer the call. Been a long time. How you holding up?" Stalker felt himself crash back into full awareness. It was a voice he had not heard in years, but he knew it. "Pierce, it has been a while. You have an odd sense of timing." "Not really," Pierce said. "Events just seem to keep bringing us together." Stalker noted that Pierce's voice was slightly strained. He sounded as tired as Stalker felt. "Stalker, I heard what happened. Know that you have friends here, including me. And know this. I know who did this to you, to your wife." Stalker tensed, his teeth clamped so tight he thought he might break a tooth. "Who is he?" Pierce sighed. "I can't tell you his name. Not now. Not on this line, but Stalker, Make no mistake, I will kill him. Even if it costs me my own life, I swear it. On the life of your unborn children, on my wife's life, he will die by my hand." Stalker felt his rage subside as quickly as it had flared to life. He could hear not only utter conviction, but also the despair of loss in Pierce's voice. "Pierce, when it happens, when you track that bastard down to whatever sunless place he is hiding, if I am on Earth, I want in. I hear you, Stalker. One last thing. I've called in a favor. Talk to your second in command. Now go see your wife." Abruptly, the line disconnected, and Stalker rose to go find Link. The Red Legion was an organization in its death throes. Atlas could feel it, even if the fools around him could not. They would cling to their faith even as the galaxy burned around them. Atlas had no intention of following them into a martyr's grave. Atlas sensed, as much as rationally assessed, that his time working with the Red Legion was running short. He could either choose to move to another of the dwindling remaining cells elsewhere, or he could seek to get off-world to where the Red Legion still had viable resources before the hunters at his heels found him. There was also a third option. He could cut ties with the Red Legion, abandon them to their fate, and go solo to stay under the radar. Atlas looked around at the remaining members of this Red Legion cell. They had broken contact and managed to evade their pursuers, but the cost had been high. Only 3 members remained. The capability of the Red Legion in Central Europe was spent, but it had left chaos and disorder in its wake, a fitting funeral pyre, Atlas mused. Atlas calmly drew his silent sidearm and casually shot the 3 remaining Red Legion operatives, none having time to react. The truth was, one man could alter the future of millions, Atlas knew. You just needed to kill the right people at the right time. That was the simple truth behind the lies. Atlas gathered up a few useful items into his bag, and then, brushing a few specks of dust from his suit, stepped out of the small, nondescript business office onto the busy sidewalk, and with a new lightness in his step strode off down the street. Stalker stood beside Zoe's bed. He could not hold her hand, as she was still in a clear isolation capsule, as much to isolate her from any potential infections as to protect visitors from the fleetingly small chance that some residue of the chemical warfare agent remained active on her skin. She was still in an induced coma, and except for the pale waxiness of her skin and gaunt, slightly sunken look of her face, she might have been sleeping peacefully. Stalker glanced around at the banks of medical equipment, the system still pumping and filtering her blood since her body lacked the capacity to carry out many of its normal functions due to the effects of the hemorrhagic compound. Stalker had been surprised to find that the entire wing of the hospital had been secured by a large element of Pathfinder operators. They had deployed sophisticated sensors and systems to protect against any future drone incursion, and by Stalker's estimation, their physical security arrangements would represent a real challenge to even a company's strength force of Terra Nova. Stalker had examined the Pathfinders closely and saw only ruthless professionals of the highest caliber. None had sought to engage him in anything but the briefest conversation, but an unspoken mutual respect had passed between them. Stalker also thought he detected something else he could not quite put his finger on, a sense that the Pathfinders felt somehow honor-bound to ensure that Zoe came to no further harm. Despite his past suspicion of the Pathfinders, Stalker had to admit he had no concerns with their competence or that Zoe was not safe under their close protection. Stalker turned back to Zoe. The doctors had said she might not wake for several days, possibly even weeks. He looked at her face. He wondered if she knew they were gone, knew that she may never be able to have children again. Could she have known in her last waking moments what had happened? What it had cost her? Moments of blood, of pain, and fear. Stalker once again felt the depths of sorrow start to rise up, and this time he let them out, his tears falling freely. Outside the room, the 2 Pathfinders on the door detail tightened their grips on their weapons. The sense of failure and fury within the unit was palpable. Their failure to neutralize the threat had caused the terrible events that had transpired. Many had wives and children of their own. They knew of the Terra Nova battle commander's reputation and the respect he had garnered within the tight-knit Pathfinder community. His deeds and actions had preceded him, and their target had seen it too. The intelligence branch's failure to recognize the connection and predict the threat had been a costly error. They wanted to make amends for those failures. They needed to.